Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to raise? Oh, good. Okay. Super. Thank you.
It is an issue. They will certainly not have booked out any of the municipal or the official albergues which take no bookings from anybody, and certainly none from any, 40 arriving in a bus. So those will always be available for the pilgrim limping in at the end of the day on their own. And then outside that, yes, tour operators are on the route. My sense is, before I used to be judgmental of that situation, but part of my task as a pilgrim is to let go any judgment I have, and I've come to understand that actually we all have a reason for going, and that everybody, no matter how they arrive on the route, something happens. I'll tell you two brief responses to that. The first one is I stayed with a woman who's now had 3 generations, her family have been offering hospitality to pilgrims. And she said, it was exactly the same in the medieval age. Up to 500,000 people were on that route. Now that's double counting because, of course, when you arrived in Santiago, in the medieval period, you had to walk home. There was no Ryanair available back then. So, but even so, the numbers were huge. And she said, "What did you think they happened in the old days?" She said, "They had exactly the same thing. They were trying to entice you. They were painting yellow arrows or whatever they had back then to try and get you past the hostel and the hotel. There was always a commercial, competitive reality. It will always be with us." So there's two ways to deal with that. One is to choose a quieter route where that competitive angle hasn't arrived, and the other thing is to see it as part of our learning of how to deal and bring our rich inner life back into the reality of the world that is around us, which is noisy and busy and full of people trying to sell us all sorts of things that we don't need.
There is a third way too, to go at a time that is not so popular.
And of course, to pick the time of year. So there's lots of ways we can deal with that particular.
So tolerance really is something that can.
Correct.
As part of it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, it became very significant after the Crusades were lost. So when the Holy Land became lost to Christianity, you couldn't go there anymore. I mean, you would be beheaded long before you arrived in the country. So there was no access anymore to Jerusalem as a place of worship for Christians. The Crusades were over. If you like that, the Crusades had failed. And there was no access to the Holy Land. Of course, Rome was another place because it housed the remains supposedly of St. Paul. But Santiago, St. James, arrived on that peninsula. And so almost overnight, around about the 9th century, these massive flood of pilgrims to the Holy Land suddenly got rerouted to Santiago because it was the only other place accessible in Europe where there was the known, supposed remains of one of Christ's disciples. And the early church, as I mentioned earlier, nearly always went to those places of special significance, and it does look as though St. James went there. It does look as though his ministry was hopelessly unsuccessful. They say he had a handful of converts, goes back to Jerusalem and is beheaded. And then his disciples bring back his body, try to bury it in Finisterre, and all sorts of lovely legends as to why it didn't happen. And they ended up in a place called Libradon, which was a Roman burial town with a Roman burial ground, 3 days away from Finisterre. And that place then became known as Santiago. It wasn't known as Santiago, then it was known as Libradon. And also an interesting sense into this, the Santiago story happened at a time there was a, if you like, there was a political reason perhaps behind the discovery of the tomb in Libradon. And that is that the St. James became the spearhead for the Reconquista, the reconquest of Iberia for Christianity, because at that stage it was a caliphate of Islam, the whole of the peninsula. We forget that. So it was under Muslim rule, and except for the northern part. And St. James became that's the figure we see as St. James, unfortunately with that awful title, St. James the Moorslayer. And that horrible image of St. James on a white charger, chopping the heads of our Muslim brethren, as opposed to Santiago, the pilgrim, the gentler pilgrim, the truer image of him as with Christ's message of unconditional love for everybody. So that's the reason. It was convenient and accessible, and you could probably go there reasonably safely. Well, Mushia is also a lovely place to wind up your pilgrimage, because Finisterre, which used to be, when I first went on it, it was a lovely place to sort of integrate the journey, space to sort of hang out from the busyness of Santiago, which is sort of quite a busy place to arrive at. But Finisterre has become quite a party town now, and there's 30 albergues there, and hundreds, maybe thousands of people all celebrating their arrival. Yeah. So if you want to sort of, have a quiet, reflective time to sort of, integrate your inner journeying, it's probably quite advisable to do the beautiful one day's walk from Finisterre to Mushia. And Mushia is a quieter place for reflection, and also a place that is associated with Santiago. He is supposed to have gone there, but the main religion is part of the Marian. Mary came there, on a boat. So there's lots of legends of Mary arriving in Mushia. So it's a place of pilgrimage in its own right. And indeed, if you get to Mushia, you are entitled to a Mushiana if you've walked there, which is a certificate which they sort of rather like the Compostela. So if you walk to Mushia, you get a Mushiana.
Right. There you go. Wonderful.
There's a similar certificate in Padron.
Yes, Padron has now done the same thing. If you walk the Portuguese route, because Padron is really where St. James's story actually started. That's where he reputedly landed the boat in Padron. Padron means the stone. It's the stone on which the boat tied up, the mooring post, which the boat carrying both St. James. I had one confidant, he'd write him say, John, St. James came here dead. And I was delighted to write back and say, good heavens gracious me, no, St. James came here alive. And that's why we're all there. It's for his message that he brought, not the bones in his body. It's the message. And so he came twice. His body came twice, once alive and once unfortunately martyred. But Padron is that place where where the story starts, in a sense. That's where there's a lovely rock there. In fact, it's on the front of the Portuguese guidebook. There's an image of Santiago. That's supposedly the place where he first preached the message of love for God, for neighbour and self. So it's very much a part of the story, and they have now produced, of course, there's also a Fistarana if you arrive at Finisterre, and Padron wasn't going to be left out, so they produced I think it's a Padroniana or whatever I forget now what they call it. But you're supposed to go and see all the places which St. James visited. But the tourist office is very happy to stamp and provide you one, provided you've had a few peppers of Padron or you've arrived there. They're not too serious about, but it's a nice thing to have to done, and Padron is a very important part of the story.
And their peppers are very popular.
And the peppers are beautiful. Yeah. Well, I think Bishop Newman is about to receive sainthood this year, or so you know the Rome, the Pope decides who will receive the sainthood, and I think you need to direct your query to either him or the Vatican as to how they go about it. I wish they'd introduce more women saints, but I really don't know what the procedure is. It's quite complicated. You know, you have to be associated with so many miracles and so forth and so on.
With the ordinary people who sort of honour the saints, what is a saint to them in the church for a saint?
Well, I you know, my imagination, I don't know, but my sense a little bit, but maybe somebody else has an answer to that, is that we're all looking for somewhere to project on our sense of the divine or divinity or holiness. So we're looking for that. You know, ultimately, we need to look inside ourselves for that. We need to, back to that lovely poem I read earlier, we need to find our own light. But I think the saints and evidently holy people or who live their lives in a holy way can be very beneficial and influential for us. They certainly have been for me. Like I mentioned David Spangler, there are, you know, these mentors in my life that I've met who are deeply spiritual and affirming of my own path and deep spirituality and reflecting it back to me. But they're very, very helpful along the way and enormously beneficial in people's journey of their own self-discovery.
Historically, very much, especially in the Middle Ages, it was saints because they had to have had performed three miracles. Then often people go on pilgrimage to the place of the saints where there's relics or the burial, seeking a miracle. So they'll often go for healing, for sickness, fertility, things like that. And different saints became known for different miracles. Like, so if you want to be able to fall pregnant, go to that one, or go to this one if you want to be healed from cancer. But the other aspect for the saints, or admiring the saints, is they were intercessors, considered as intercessors. So those two aspects, I think, especially in Europe, is why people will venerate saints.
And picking up on that, thank you, that lovely explanation, is in Finisterre, there's the most beautiful hermitage of Saint-Guillaume. Has anybody ever seen it here? He is a Christian saint, lived in a little hermitage on the top of Mount Faccio, facing east. All the pagan world faced west towards the setting sun, but he faced east towards Jerusalem, and there he had a little hermitage, and it has become very much associated the cult with fertility. And today I witnessed many times when I've gone there, because it's such a special place. It's quite, nobody really finds it. You have to wade through a lot of gorse to get to it, but when you get to it, I've often found and discreetly from a distance seen young women lying there. So this strength of these, this draw is very real for many people, and they will find these places in order to, in this particular case, conceive. So this is very real for people and important for them. And many of you here have probably been to Lourdes, and how powerful that is for many people in their healing. And Lourdes, incidentally, is on one of the it's on one of the caminos in a sense, because you can very easily get to Lourdes and go through the Camino Aragonés over the Somport Pass from Lourdes, or join indeed in Saint-Jean. So there are many of these places of known miracles where people go today, and indeed Lourdes has 10,000 people a year who go, many to hopefully receive a miracle. Yes, I mean, I live half the year on the Camino, really, in the sense of when I started writing the guidebooks, I never thought that, well, A, they would be popular, and B, that if they were to be relevant, they had to be updated regularly. So they need to be walked because the routes change, the facilities change, and, because they're very popular now, people do, they want to be in it if they're opening up something. So a lot of people write to me, so I know where to look. And a lot of people write to say, well, I went to Mary's hostel and it is now a discotheque. So could you kindly amend it for the next edition? Well, what happened there, it was a sad case, but then don't forget, you must know the countless millions of people who are walking. But I was contacted by the police because she was carrying my guidebook, and I had shown the particular route that she was on. Now what happened there is somebody had redirected the signposts. But
And he's been caught.
Sorry?
And he was caught.
Yes, absolutely. But so I took it out, and then I decided, no, it has to be in. Life is what it is, and indeed there's a little shrine there now for her, and it's very clearly waymarked, and it did initiate. There are now, gendarmes, police on horseback, in the hills and the mountains. So it's very well, and there's indeed police patrols now along all the routes. It's a very, very safe environment, and it's an alternative route that's well worth thinking about if you're going. Yeah.
Because that little town is extraordinary, isn't it?
It is very beautiful. Yes.
It's all made out of stone.
Yes. Yes.
Roads.
Yes.
Horrible to walk on.
Yes, I mean that is the problem with the Portuguese roads too. Is they're quite difficult to walk on. Yes. Mm-hmm. No. What I say is to put the thing into a correct sort of perspective. Life is dangerous. I mean, we mightn't all get home tonight, God forbid. Anything can happen to any of us at any time. There's no security in this life. However, what I do mention in trying to sort of put the perspective of that particular young woman into context, people are indeed die on the route to Santiago, mostly on the roads because the roads are dangerous. You often cyclists, you often see little memorials along the way to cyclists. But again, there's somebody came up to me yesterday. I was talking about there's a beautiful film called The Celtic Voyage, and it's about 7 Irishmen who built a curragh and rowed it to all around the coast of England and France and to Spain, carried the curragh up to the cathedral. It's a very beautiful story, and if you should see the film if you haven't, because you really get a sense of the Gaelic culture that is the Irish Celtic culture, but actually it came from Galicia. That's how the Celts, Irish Celts, came. Milesian Celts from Galicia, and one of the captain was, I met all the crew, I didn't meet the captain, but the boat was overturned going over across the Minu River, and he drowned. And she was saying, gosh, what a dreadful, and I said, oh no. I said, it is magnificent. Here was a man who was well into his 60s, on a pilgrimage, loves the sea, and he gets taken. I mean, what a wonderful way to go. It seemed to me quite glorious. But yes, we don't want to see a young girl ending her life unnecessarily on the route. But luckily, and a lot of women write to me, and I realise I'm a privileged white elderly male. You can't get much more privileged in the world than that. But I have my daughters who've all walked the route, and they can sort of help direct me in some answers. But it's true when I said to their mother, my wife, when they were going, look, darling, you absolutely, if you want to worry about your daughters, worry about them coming home from the disco in the local town at night. Don't worry about them on the Camino de Santiago. There is no safer place on earth where people, the Camino family, are looking out for us. Have you seen? Oh no, she's having a quiet time, but you wait, in the next door cafe till she arrives. There's a network there that is second to none. I can conceive of no safer place or environment for anybody to go and on a journey of self-discovery. That would be my general answer to any questions concerning safety. I'll give maybe two answers to that, and they're both contradictory. The first one is that the Camino, all the Caminos, particularly the Camino Frances, a lot of it owes its relative wealth to the pilgrims passing through. And one example would be that lovely town on the way, whose name escapes me for the moment, where it was a pilgrim village that then completely became abandoned. I mean, I went through there and slept in an abandoned house there 30 years ago. Not one single person lived in that village. Now today, it's in 30 years' time, it's got 3 or 4 albergues, 2 shops, a pub, a church has been reconstructed. So the regeneration of that town is owed solely and specifically to the pilgrims coming through. And if the pilgrims hadn't been coming through, those people wouldn't be having a life, a way of living, and that village would have remained dead. So that's a very positive impact for that particular town. And that's true of many towns along the way, because the route does go through some very quiet and remote areas. It is also true, of course, that there are some places where people have absolutely, they see the route going past them. Maybe they have a hotel, in a parallel street and nobody goes by them, or, in a town that's 10, and they're angry and upset that somebody else is getting the horde of pilgrims coming through, and other people have bought a house there and just want peace and quiet, and all these pilgrims are coming through. You will get all human emotions and responses to that. So there is some places where there is a sense of fatigue, and certainly there is a lot of projection on tour parties, buses of 40 people who suddenly arrive somewhere on a path, and you're going, it can be, we need to know how to deal with that individually, and it's not uncommon to find people doing what you have said, and wishing that we weren't there. But that is generally speaking not the response we get. We get a warm welcome, generally speaking, as we walk through Spain. But it doesn't mean that those situations don't happen. They do, they will, because we're human. Lovely. Well, a little plug for the the work that you do in these organisations. I'm always at pains to suggest to the hospitaleros in these to take time to nurture themselves, because the modern pilgrim, unfortunately, we also need to be mindful of this, is becoming very demanding. We arrive into a place and we have an expectation which is not a good pilgrim place to be. A pilgrim should not have the expectations that somebody will run around after them laundering their shirts, which they did very nicely when I arrived here. Mind you, I had no expectation, but it was very nice when it was done. Another point is that there are a number of people have said to me here, how could they would like to give something back. They would like to go there over to Spain and spend some weeks, 2-3 weeks, helping out these places, the private albergues. Now there is a run by the association here where you can do an hospitalero training and train how to be a warden in these places, and they will place you at the association here in the list of places, municipal albergues looking for people. But this is another thing where you know the place, where you can write or know somebody and say, look, I will come and maybe with a colleague, if you've done the training, because they don't want to have to train somebody else in themselves, but there's very good training done here in Australia. In all the major cities, they have the trainings coming to them. I know they do it regularly here in Sydney. And then you could even offer to give these people a break. They say, look, we come over next year with a friend of mine, we've done the training, and if you've really established a relationship because you've stayed there and had a good experience like the place you're talking about, you could help out and you could give them a 2-week break.
They could go on pilgrimage.
Correct. Absolutely. So, correct. So there are ways we can interact with and help and assist bringing rest to those people who need it.
And I did
Oh, absolutely. No, really it is a pilgrimage. No, it's a different pilgrimage, but it is a pilgrimage. We absolutely must get out of the mindset that the only way to be a true pilgrimage is to carry your own luggage. That will be probably a very deep experience, but no, everybody has their own. And here I'll just give you this little story. Which completely removed forever any judgment I have about somebody doing a pilgrimage with their luggage being carried, for instance. And I found myself walking up and I saw somebody in front of me carrying a very, very light day pack. It probably only had a bit of water in it and maybe an apple. And I thought I'd dealt with my prejudice and on this subject. But obviously she felt something in, because by the time I came up with her, she turned around to me and she said, her first thing was, and normally it's, buen camino, hello, or whatever, and she said to me, oh, I'm really sorry, but I'm carrying only a day pack. So she obviously felt something in my energy. She was an Irish girl, and she told me a story that still almost makes me cry every time I say it. She had a spinal condition, and she was unable to walk. She's always wanted to walk the Camino de Santiago, and her medical team said, no, I'm sorry, you'll never be able to walk the Camino de Santiago. Your body, your back, your spine can't take it. But she eventually convinced them that if she found somebody to take her luggage, and if she only walked, 5 or 6 kilometers a day and found accommodation at short stages, and she promised to do certain things, they allowed her to go. And this was a woman I had projected on was not a true pilgrim. Well, I tell you in that situation who the true pilgrim was, and it wasn't me. So we cannot judge. We absolutely cannot judge. If we're a true pilgrim, we must make no judgment about anybody else walking the route and how they're walking it. Yes, I do. And the answer to that is I have learned how to find, as you call it, solace, quiet, in the business of life. Because it's something that we need to find. That's like bringing the Camino home, which I mentioned earlier. We have to develop a skill that we can actually bring it back into the business and of our everyday life. So I'm utterly at quiet in this company, for instance, I'm not always like that. I haven't. There's often where I get trapped and I lose it, but I'm rather like the woman who realized that she wasn't getting her sense of a family and brotherhood, sisterhood. When I miss it, I know it very quickly, and I say to myself, I've got trapped by this whole hurly-burly world, and I'm able to step out of it. So I think the short answer is yes, I have. Although not always. I'm not permanently in that state.
Thank you.
No, but I'm very mindful of the responsibility and about the influence that I bring to places and the routes that I write about, and that, by bringing out a new guidebook that will, create some change there. But I like to feel I do it sensitively. I mean, I don't need what the guidebooks produce financially, and I'm able to divert a large portion of this to facilitating and helping create albergues and new routes and facilities along the way. So, part of the gift I have is with that, is being able to help. And I've, been quite instrumental on the Portuguese route in helping create albergues and supporting initiatives along the way. And the same thing will probably happen on the community in Vienna, which my publisher doesn't like the idea that there's only 72 people who walk it. But
along that for 2 hours coming into
right.
I went the wrong way.
Lovely, great, right.
It was lovely. It was
Yes,
lovely
yeah.
2 hours.
But we all have a responsibility or an ability to respond sensitively to everything that happens in our lives. And yes, I do have influence, and I like to feel that I use it sensitively.
Thank you.